Okay, guys, good morning, everyone. Today, we are going to discuss about understanding processing deficits, which is in your unit 2. Okay, so before we move to educational intervention deficits, or you can say educational intervention processing deficits, we need to understand the processing deficits first. What are those? How it works and what are the factors involved in this. Okay, here unit 2 is talking about educational intervention, of understand of processing deficits. That means how we are going to plan those processing deficits where child face difficulties. That processing difficulties might be as per your syllabus, which they have given a five major important point, that is attention, perception, thinking, memory, and metacognition. So how these factors, how these domains, we are going to work on individually so that the child can, move further and develop in his, learning process or teaching learning process. So we are going to understand first what is processing deficits, and then in the next class we are going to see educational intervention, the methodologies, the recommendation, the accommodations, how we can do or how we can solve this processing deficits. Okay, so let us move and understand what is a meaning of processing first of all, which is very important to know before we move further. Okay, now, when we say a processing, what comes to our mind? Now always processing means something, it's like, where you have a lot of machines kind of thing, and something getting processed to, come up with the product, come up with the final product. So processing refers to how the brain takes in. Now, see, this is your brain, okay? You can see a brain. Your brain has lot of components. Your brain has lot of small units, which is made up of nerves, which is twisted together. It is partitioned in different
So your
compartments.
voice is breaking, unable to hear.
It's okay now. It's audible now.
Yeah, now it is clear. Okay.
Okay. So, as I was telling, your brain is composed of different subunits, different compartments, which involves a specific, target, which works in specific ways. So, for example, if any information, if any information, it is going to the brain via the sense organs, via the, it might be a visual, auditory, touch, or anything. That information has to be processed so that the child can speak, what you wanted. See, for example, let us say a child with learning disability or intellectual disability. Sometimes what happens, when you talk with them, okay, when you talk with them, suddenly what happens, one second, who are joining now? So when you talk with the intellectual disability, you say, or with the learning disability, you talk a lot of things, or some, for example, you say, come here. They take time to come towards you. Why it is taking a time? Because the processing is not happening fast there. Why it is not happening very fast? Because the subunits, the what do you say, the component, the compartment is compressed, where the information is not reaching properly and it is not processing. So until that information process, until the child don't understand what he has to do, he may not be able to do, and that's why it is delayed. That's why we call a developmental delay, because all children with intellectual disability or any other developmental disability, they are delay in their performance. They are delay in their, doing the activities. That's why we say it's a developmental delay. But here, the processing refers how the brain takes, how your brain takes in, use, learn, reason, and store, and that particular storage, how it retrieves and express the information. That's what I want to tell you. As I said just now, processing, if it is delayed, that means the compartment, the components of the brain is compressed. The information is not moving into it. It is not processing, and result, the child will be telling, but in some time, it will take time. It will be delayed. So that is your processing, how it works. Okay. See, everyone, everyone, whether me or you or anybody, everyone processes. Some individual may have more difficulty in one or more area of processing, and some may have no difficulty at all. So every one process, whether it is a human being or animal or any other creature, processing is done. Processing, without processing, the functioning will not occur. The functioning of the child, the adult, or any other creature, it will not work at all. So processing is very, very important. So that's what you need to understand in the context of learning disability. When you talk to the children, if you see something, child is not able to reflect you, respond to you, or show you, that means there is some sort of deficit, processing deficits in the brain structure or in the components of the brain where he is responding in that way, or where it is delayed. So that we need to work on, that we need to understand and try to focus. Now, see, learning, gaining knowledge and procedure, this depends on the integration of many processes in the human brain. As I said to you, in the human brain, there are lots of machines, there are a lot of ways, lot of neurons, nerves, where it has to process together. Until unless it process together, you may not get a better result. You may not able to get what your expectation is. So learning, gaining knowledge and procedure is where they have to work together to process. They have to work together. These all three components has to function together, so that something new come, or something, what do you say, things come better, or what is your expectation, that comes in a flow. So that's why the processing, this is what the processing is. This is what the processing, if any problem in the processing functioning, that becomes your deficit. That means that the child has a problem. So that problem we need to rectify. To rectify that problem, that's why we are studying this educational intervention, how we can plan particular intervention in the area of attention, perception, metacognition to improve. That we are going to see. Okay. So before that, as I said, we need to understand the processing. Okay, now let us move and understand the general learning cycle, which is important to understand before we move to educational intervention, because this is how it you have to understand. You need to understand the chain, the cycle, where you need to trigger it. So as you can see here in this, the first step is in the cycle is taking in selected information through one or more sense. That means it might be a visual, auditory, or a kinesthetic, or while touch. So it can be any mode. The information has to be taken first of all. So taking a selected information. Now, for example, you are teaching let us say, a concept um, on a mathematics or a symbol. So you are giving a selected information to the child. That means on that particular subject, on that particular object, that is your selected information through a different sense organs. It might, you might be using a visual, it might be using a auditory, you might be showing the symbols of the mathematics, or you might be talking to your talking via your mouth, or it depends how the information reach to the brain. And the second one is your manipulating that information in short term or a working memory. Now we need to understand what is a working memory here. Okay, we will discuss that in a while. So manipulating that information in a short term or a working memory. You know what? The short term memory. What is short term memory? For example, now just try to think. Okay, you have a brain. Now this is our brain, where brain includes a long-term and short-term memory. So, see, there are two ways in your brain, long-term and short-term. Now, if you want to move to the third step, which is called your encoding the information into the long-term storage. Now, as you can see, from step 2 to step 3 is where the memory is involved. Okay, so this memory has two components, short-term and long-term. If anything has to be pushed into the compartment of the long-term, you know what? The short-term has to be practiced, rehearsed, so that it is pushing into the long term for the permanent use, for the permanent storage. So that is what we have to manipulate the information in short term. There is a compartment. If the in a brain, there is a small compartment of short term where you have some sort of window or a door. See, if all the information is getting into it, getting stored into the short term, the compartment or the window, it gets open and go to the long term storage and go to the long term brain. Whereas you don't have any door after the long term, it gets accumulated there and you use it whenever you want. So try to understand in that way, because that's how we have to understand. Okay. And then fourth one is your retrieving the information, as I said, to produce an expression or a response. So it's very simple. It's very clear how this learning cycle works in the child's brain or a human brain. Okay. This, and we need to target whether my child has a deficit at the step 2 or step 3. My child is learning the objects, learning the concepts, trying to manipulate at the short-term, memory, but is not able to remember when I asked after 1 month. That means it is not pushed to the long-term brain. That means you need to work on more on the short-term memory or working memory. Then one day, so in that way, you need to understand where my child stands, and then you need to make child push into it. For example, let's say the child is, whatever you have taught, and child is, generalizing the things, retrieving those information after 2 months. That means, yes, that particular concept has reached to the long term, and the child is producing the responses, or child is making, better use of it. Now, let us understand this. As per your syllabus, these 5 categories, these 5 domains, we have to discuss. Now, attention, metacognition, working memory, thinking, and perception. See, we cannot work individually. For example, if I say, in the general learning cycle, if I use only attention, the other part may not be involved. No, it's not like that, because all the 5 domains is linked together. If you're working on the memory, attention will come into force, the perception will come into force, the metacognition will come into force, the thinking, the child has to think. Then only the child will be, moving towards the generalization. Then only the child will be, moving towards the product, what your expectation is. So without attention, the perception may not work. Without perception, the attention may not work. Okay, so this all domain has to work together, has to link together. Then only the processing deficits will come over. Yes, there might be, some area like attention, metacognition, where that particular stage the child is not able to perform well. So you need to target that, and then you need to process it, or then you need to, intervene it. But remember, even if the attention is low, that it doesn't mean that the working memory is good, or even working memory is not working. It might be working, it might be good, but he has a more difficulty in the area of attention. So you need to work on simultaneously. If you're working on the attention, go back and check whether memory is quite okay. What is the level of the memory? What is the level of perception, thinking area? So then only you need to target. You need to try to what do you say, uh, build a hierarchy, which is required most, for what reason, from where the problem is getting elicited, from where the problem is getting started. So in that way, you need to understand. Whereas in the perception, we have to discuss the auditory processing or visual processing, which is also called auditory perception or visual perception. Whereas in the working memory, now I was talking about the working memory. A working memory is nothing but your, the short term, which involves, it's quite simple, how your, the brain structure is taking the information and retrieving it later. So that is your working memory. It's a kind of short term memory which is, concerned with the immediate processing, which involves the processing. It's a cognitive system, you can say. It is a bunch of your cognitive system which has a capacity to hold the information, for the temporary use or the permanent use. Okay, so working memory is important for reasoning, and also to guide, to make the decision, to to do the problem solving things. Working memory is very, very important, because see, working memory also is a thinking skills, as a, is a thinking skill, as I said. So when you think, the memory will work. When you pay attention, your memory will work. When you take the information via auditory visual, memory work. And metacognition is like your, again, self thinking. So this is what, so it is linked, all the domains is linked to each other, so that processing can be quick, benefits very easily to the particular person or child. So this is about your domains of 5 domains, which we are going to um, see individually. So let us understand. We are not going to see educational intervention today. What are the accommodation and strategies, and how do we are going to, what are the activities involved in that? Rather, we are going to just understand what are the memories and 5 domains, and then later we will go in detail. It might be tomorrow or in the next class. We will try to finish it off by next class, your educational intervention. Okay. So memory. So let us go in little brief or in detail to understand the memory structure. Now, as we know, the memory, we have a short-term memory, working memory, or long-term memory, or you can say a long-term, um, stay or long-term storage, you can say. Okay. So short-term memory. See, short-term memory or a sensory memory. You can say a sensory memory because the information, the incoming information directly it goes to the sensory memory. That means the sense, it might be a visual, it might be auditory, it might be kinesthetic. Okay. So all incoming information first goes to the short-term memory or a sensory memory. So this information has to be attended, or this information, if not attended, then the information stores particular or stays in short-term memory as well. It gets stored in that particular area. It may not go further. If it is attended, then so how it is attended when there is a better attention, there your attention come into force. When it is attended, then it goes to the working memory, or you can say now your memory is the intermediary between the short term and the long term. So working, that means the processing is getting into force now. So working memory, when the child worked with certain objects, when the child worked with a certain concept, there are a lot of things are involved. It might be attention, it might be again your thinking. So a lot of other domains are also involved. So working memory, if the child is attending the concept, sometimes he may forget, sometimes he may retain the information. So a lot of things. This is just an example of forgetting. Sometimes we say, uh, what is thinking? No, no, what not is thinking? What is a thinking? What is memory? So my memory is nothing but what we forget. When we forget, we store. So there is some proverb like that. So in working memory, sometimes we forget the things, but when we work, when our working memory get rehearsed, get encoded, then it goes to the long term memory. It doesn't mean that when it goes to the long term memory it doesn't get forget. It is also where we forget the things. Okay, so if the child if you want your child not to forget the concept, if you want child, you know he must or she must not get he must store the concept for the long term, then you must do all retrieval, you must do encoding, then you do a rehearsal, so that the working memory um, is there is a connectivity between the working memory. So this is how the information processing takes place in the brain. The incoming information comes and stored in the sensory memory. It goes to the working memories and then long-term memory. But there are certain stages where if you don't target, if you don't practice, it may reach to the forgetting. It may, if you're not attended, then again it may not move to the other compartment or the other stages. Okay, so this is how your memory. For example, I will give you an activity. Now, as you can see here, it's a memory activity we use daily, to improve the child's cognition skills. For example, you can see here a list of, the words, list of word which has a 5-letter words, which has a, you know, which has 6-letter words. So there are different, words which we can see. For example, if you want to make the child, to work on his memory. For example, if you want to see whether the child is memory is working, whether the child is thinking, whether the child is attending. So you have to give this flashcard with the words for 30 seconds. And once the child has read all those words, try to connect, try to store. Then after 2 minutes, you ask the child to repeat it, what he has learned, and try to note how much the child is able to, you know, retain those information. So in 30 seconds, the child has, in 30 seconds, the child has read, and after 2 minutes, that the gap of 2 minutes, it tells you about, you know, how he's working, how his working memory is actually working, and then whether you think whether the child has retained those information at least for a temporary or a long term, you know, for use. So this is how you try to, you know, give a lot of memory activities. Based on this, you can give a nonsense word as well as the sense words. Where, for example, if it is milk, milk, okay, this is what called your sense word. If you want to make it a nonsense word, you can say like LK, LKMI. So that which doesn't have any meaning, you know. So even you give, even you can give those kind of you know, activities to understand the child's memory skills. Now short term memory, it requires, you know, it requires to store the information for a short time. That is your short term memory. Okay, because working memory working memory is a conscious processing. It involves a manipulation of information. Short-term memory is the place where the child initiate to learn. The child initiate to store the information for a longer period. So this is the first stage where the child tries to learn. Okay. So it involves every information has to be manipulated at the short term, you know, at the short term memory. Then let us move to the perception and understand what is this. Now, perception means, as I said, you have a visual perception as well as you have a auditory perception. So, but visual processing involves how well your brain can interpret the information, the visual process. You know, with your eyes, whatever you see, okay, fine, I'll show you one. But let us understand what is first a visual processing. Now, you know, in visual processing, you see the difference between the things, right? When I give one picture, you need to see the difference. You remember the visual details, what I have shown, whether I have shown you the picture, the words, 5 letter words, you know, a 6 letter words, or a beautiful picture, a scene. So that you need to remember. That helps to remember. This is how, you know, your memory is connected with. Then filling the missing part, like your puzzles. Then visualization and imagination, like your imagination, again here your thinking is involved. So visual as well as a thinking. So see how it is connected together. The spatial relationship, you try to do the, you know, creating the things, try to understand the direction. This is how the visual processing works. Now see this one. You can see this picture and try to you know, understand the concept of the visual perception. Now you can see the elephant here. What difference you can see? You know, yeah. Sometime you can see.
It's an illusion.
Yes. What the difference you can see?
It's an illusion. Actually, we can see 4 legs at a time, but if we
Yes.
see the same 4 legs, we can see in a different direction as well.
Yes. It's like, you know, the elephant's legs has kept in different direction. If we see, you know, just try to you know, shorten your eyes and just see, you will see very clearly, where you need to, and just open your eyes, then it may reflect in the, where your visual perception goes a broader way. Whenever you want to see such things, no, you just shut on your eyes and see, close your one eyes and see. You will try to go near and try to understand the concept. But this is how, the perception works. This is how the child perceives when you show something to read. This is how when the child perceives when you show some picture. uh, because if the child is not able to perceive it, that means the child may have some processing deficits in that particular, perception component, in that particular, the brain part where the perception is involved. As I said in the beginning, a brain has a different component. Perception is one component, attention is one component, thinking is one component, metacognition is one component, memory is one component. If any component is compressed, the information will not process. It's very, very simple. So you need to understand in that way. Okay. So this is how you try to, do the things. Perception, how it works. Then a person with a weakness in a visual processing, how it, what are the deficits they have. So having a difficulty, like, in seeing the similarities and the difference in the picture or the letters or the number, words, or a group of objects. This is how, the um, the child is perceiving when the child has a difficulty in the visual processing or visual perception. The child may not able to understand the similarities and the differences. Sometimes confusing between the left from the right when presented with the visual material. So these are the difficulties they face when they have the, visual processing deficits. They may also have a difficulty in recognizing the same words when repeated in the sentence. You individually you give the word, and when the child see in the sentence, he may face a difficulty. Then having a difficulty of remembering the sequence and the sequencing the visual information. It might be the letters, the numbers, the symbols, or some other objects. They may also have a difficulty in seeing the spatial relations and patterns, puzzles. So, wherever the visual processing is involved, okay, if the child has a difficulty in that, he may elicit this kind of problem. There might be some more problem which I have not listed here. Okay, this is a common kind of problem which the child faces. Now, auditory perception. Now here in auditory perception, see auditory process.
Sir,
Yeah.
sorry to inform you, like one of the students, Lavanya, my classmate, is out of the group, sir.
Auditory processing involves how well, your student can understand and process the auditory information that is presented orally. So whatever you say, how better your child is taking, listening, and processing it. For example, if you would have seen the differences when you talk to the learning disability as well as the intellectual disability. If you ask at least 2-3 sentences at a time, he may not able to process it because he may have a auditory processing deficit. If you ask one sentence, at least he will try to do something because he may not be able to retain those auditory informations to his brain and process it. So auditory information, sometime I will tell you, if anybody have taken the IELTS exams, in that you have the listening skills where you have to listen, retain the information, and then you answer it. So this is how where you try to store, try to process your auditory things actually. And it also happens, it doesn't mean the child has a difficulty, okay, in the his genetic way. It might be a language barrier as well. If the child is not, for example, you are Telugu guy and the child is Hindi, if you are talking something Telugu, he may not able to understand, not able to retain, he may not bother to, listen you at all. So language barriers must not come into force to judge the child that child has a auditory processing deficit. So that you need to understand. So that is your auditory processing. But the student with auditory processing, involves, just hold on. Yeah, auditory processing involves like hearing difference between the sound and the voice. So if you say some word to the student and he may able to, okay guys, do one thing, you all guys just connect again because it will get disconnect. Okay, connect. Okay, so I was talking about the auditory processing. Now auditory processing is like, if see, auditory processing involves your hearing. Your ear is the main part, hearing differences between the sound. Sometimes the child has to judge the similarities, what the teacher says and what he has heard from the TV or from the other teacher, because he has to judge the similarities. If he is not able to judge, then he may be in dilemma that this is something different word where the teacher has taught me and this teacher is saying me something else. So he has to understand the similarities. It is the same. This is how it sounds. So when you teach the child with such developmental delays, you need to be very clear. You need to focus. You need to explore the sound, which has a less similar differences. I know, because if I speak, it might be different. When you speak, it might be different. When he hears from the YouTube, it might be different. But there should be very less difference. If not, the child will get confused again. Remembering specific words or numbers is also involved. Auditory, involves that. Remembering general sound patterns where your auditory involves. Understanding even when they miss some sound, that is also where your auditory involved. Then blending a part of words together. Okay, so you blend the words together to make a sentence, or to make a new word, or you blend a part of letters to make a better sentence, where auditory involved, because he has to listen, then he has to blend it and tell it. So this is how the auditory processing involved. But the student with auditory processing difficulty may have they may take a longer to answer the question orally, because sometimes they will not understand what the teacher has said just now, or they haven't listened properly what was explained in the classroom, or that question is not processed in the brain. He has not understand, he has skipped, he has missed, he has listened wrongly. So this is how they will take a longer time to understand. Now, they may have a difficulty in remembering the information to present orally when the child faced the difficulties in auditory. Then they may have a difficulty in listening, comprehending the information orally. They also may have a difficulty in asking the oral questions and direction to be repeated. Again and again, they will ask to repeat. See, they're asking again and again when it happens, when you miss something, right? Even you guys, when you go to the conference and you ask, can you repeat, pardon please? This is because you missed. This is quite natural. But when you teach with the intellectual disability or learning disability or autism spectrum disorder, sometimes they may be quite steady, stable, sitting, no distractors, but still they are missing. That is a processing deficit, okay, auditory. See, anything happen at once, that is normal. Anything which happens again and again, that is a problem. So that you need to target, not which happens once. Okay, so having a difficulty to following the multiple step direction which presents orally. Okay, I said if you ask a child a multiple things to do orally, he may not able to retain those information to his a short-term memory. Then naturally the deficits occurs. So this is how the auditory processing works, because students with difficulties in auditory processing usually have a most difficult in reading, writing, and understanding the expressions, understanding and expressions as well, which comes a big domain in language. So this is how the student with auditory problem face numerous problems in a different domain. Let us move to the attention. Now, attention. It's when you listen to this word attention, that means you need to concentrate. Okay, so attention is nothing but a concentration of the consciousness upon one object rather than another object, upon another object. Okay, this definition was given by Dumville in 1938. Okay, so you can find this definition in any education psychology book, or even you can get it on the internet, which can refer it. So it's quite clear. Your attention involves the concentration. Attention is the concentration of consciousness upon one object. If you give one object to the child, he has to do that particular task, do that particular activity at least for 10 minutes. See, हम लोग कितने भी how much we can concentrate as a normal being, not more than 45 minutes. 45 minutes, it's a fact where we can concentrate in one, if we are quite energetic. If not, we are not able to, concentrate continuously for 1, 2, or 3 hours without distracting. No, we will distract. So 45 minutes is the best where even as a normal being we can, be attentive at the particular task. So that's what you need to measure your scale from 45 minutes to 0. So when you give a such activity, you make sure that you try to measure how far my child is able to play, how far my child is able to do that activity, whether he's focusing for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or 30 minutes. 30 minutes is quite good, where the child has ability, capacity to hold the information. So that you need to, check it out. And consciousness means without distracting. On that, he's loving that particular task, object, which you have presented to the child. So that is your consciousness without distracting. He is giving his 100% in the activity. That is your attention. Okay, so there are different activities for attention and concentration. I will show you. That we will discuss in educational intervention when we discuss it, because educational intervention, you have to just plan it out. What are the different methodologies, accommodations, methods to improve the attention? There we will discuss a lot of activities. So in short, you have to understand the attention. Let us move to the metacognition. Now, metacognition is knowing what you know. Knowing what you know means what? See, when an individual consciously uses his mind, executive control process, or his mind, that is called your the metacognition. The actual process of your metacognition is nothing but, no, let us understand. See, what is metacognition? It is nothing but a cognition about cognition. It is nothing by thinking about thinking. It is nothing but about knowing about knowing. It is nothing becoming aware of one's awareness. It's nothing but hot questions. That means hot questions means high order thinking skill. The child has a high order thinking skill. Okay, that might be termed as a, you know, that means the child is moving beyond the target. Okay, so where he is using, he's constructing what he has. He's going above his way. So most of the teacher who use metacognitive strategies has a positive impact on the child. Okay, it is simply, it refers to the process which is used to plan, monitor, and assess one's understanding and performance on the particular object. Okay, so that is your metacognition actually. It For example, if I want to know thinking about one's thinking, if I want to know about your thinking, what you think, then it refers nothing but I will plan, I will monitor you, I will assess your understanding, I will check your performance. This is how, the metacognition works actually. So you can assess this by, observations as well. So it helps in the making a decision to write down, for example, write down the grocery list, because you cannot remember everything. So there you use your metacognition. Okay. So this is how your metacognition tries to work. See, knowing one's processing strengths and weaknesses is very important for metacognition, very important to metacognition. This is just a fact which we are talking about. So knowing one's processing strength, this is my strength. If you know one's processing strength, then I think it can help it out to you all guys. Are you able to listen? Hello? Hello? Hello?
And third one, a reader with a good metacognition. It might be a child who has a good, reading skills, will be aware of when they come to a word they don't know or does not have any sense. So, yes, they will understand that when I read, I am going to make this kind of errors. This error can be detected by the audience. So he or she must be aware in the learning process that behavior which he or she is going to involve in the learning. So nothing but the child must be aware of his degree of reflection, his degree of selection of learning strategies, or which can result the processing in a better way, or you can say then only we can improve the ability to learn among the students. So that is your metacognition. Self-advocacy. Why we need to talk about a self-advocacy here? Because itself, where I can talk about myself. So it is a critical that the student understand how they learn and what they need to do to be a successful. That is your metacognition, where each individual must talk about themselves, about their right. Okay, so even if they have a disability, teach them about their disability and what it means, about how they learn. So you need to talk about their strength, you need to talk about their weaknesses and how they can take these strength and weaknesses to the next level. That you need to teach disabled children. It might be a learning disability, they may have some difficulties in planning or organizing, monitoring their own work, directing their own learning, self-reflecting. These are all difficulty faced by the learning disabilities. So you need to realize them. The child, if the child is good in planning, or the child is little slow in organizing the things, or how they can monitor themselves, so you need to realize them so that they can monitor their own learning. So that's why that is a metacognition. You must also make them to realize the metacognition cycle, which is very important. They have to list down all the things. Now let us come to the thinking. Now, thinking, as we know, it also involves in the the processing of our brain. So, thinking, it is a mental process in which it begins from the psychological association and models of the world. So, what does it mean? See, thinking, it is nothing but it involves, it manipulates the information about some concept. It tries to solve the problem. It tries to make the decision. It try to take, or decide the better decision of your problems. So that is your thinking. So thinking also has a great impact in processing. So thinking also has uh, greater impact in logical getting or creating the ideas, or in the learning disability, you may have sometime a very challenging task, like uh, the child will be sometime a critical thinking, or sometime he will be in the, what is that word called in psychology, internal mental process, the internal mental process that makes sense of our experience. So that is your thinking. Okay, so some student may be a critic, have a creative thinking, some might not have up to that level. If you see even you know Bloom taxonomy, if you are aware of Bloom taxonomy, you know that can define the no what is critical thinking actually. So where the child must move from remembering to the creating level. There is a concept called scientific thinking which is involved. So that all thing we need to keep in mind. This is just a gist of it. This is we're just trying to understand what is thinking and how it looks. So thinking is nothing but a most of, see, student thinks, even they sit in the classroom, or even they walk, or even they sleep. So that's not a very new concept, but the thinking has some modalities which we need to follow. Thinking follows certain approach, like for example, why we are thinking for evaluating ourselves, we are thinking to identify something, we are thinking to analyze something, we are thinking to solve the problem. In what way? So what are the approaches, modalities for your thinking for? So you're thinking for happiness, so what kind of thinking? So that kind of things, if there is you know a difficulty in children, that leads to a hindrance in the processing. So that's why your thinking is very important. So there are three types of thought our brain produces. One is insightful, used for problem solving, then experimental, as I said, and then your chatter, that is your nothing but what do you say, talking informally about the, which is not very important. That is called a chatter box, we can say. Some student might be talking in the classroom without any meaning, or something like gossiping the thing. So these three types of thought process works in our brain, which we need to understand and try to solve. the problem. So finally, the insightful thinking help us